Well, hello students. Let's get started with the first part of our two-part lesson on the role of diet in healthy lifestyles. And a good place to get started is with God's Word. The book of Matthew tells us that it's not what goes into our mouths that defiles us, but what comes out. In other words, it's our words that build up or destroy others, and in turn build up and destroy ourselves. So today we're going to consider some particular topics, one being weight energetics, and also how our body composition changes when there's a weight loss. Then we're going to talk a little bit about individual diets, but particularly the components of what has been called the Mediterranean diet. A little bit about supplements versus food, and then lastly this interesting topic which is called, given the name, hormesis. Well, as we've discussed before, maintaining a healthy weight is not so much a lifestyle as a result of a lifestyle. The actual lifestyle factors are food ingested and energy expended. And we have to keep in mind that food atoms and the energy contained in their bonds are never thrown away by the body. They're either converted to carbon dioxide and water to produce energy, in other words, burned, or they're stored as fat. It's important also to remember that from the point of view of a weight, a calorie is a calorie. Now, of course, from the point of view of nutrition, some sources of calories are better than others. But a calorie is a calorie in terms of its contribution to weight. Calories are not interconverted with weight. Okay, we can't go from calories to grams. But rather, calories are just a numerical equivalent to weight, with roughly 3,500 calories being equivalent to a pound of fat. You can think of it as being analogous to say that a gallon of gas is $3. They're not the same thing, but $3 represents the cost of a gallon of gas, just like 3,500 calories represents the cost, if you will, of a pound of fat. So, if we take in as much food as we burn, we'll keep our weight constant. But if we want to lose weight, we have to either cut back on the food calories eaten or increase the food calories burned. The second solution can be problematic for two reasons. First, you have to exercise really intensely to burn off calories. It would take like a half hour of really intense running, or maybe 2 hours of walking, to burn the equivalent of a single donut. Second, if you try to burn off calories by increasing your metabolism through, say, something other than exercise like ephedra or some other dietary supplement, you end up increasing your metabolism for a prolonged period of time. And I don't have time to go into it right now. Perhaps we could discuss it in class. But such long-term increases in metabolism are really not good for you. They're linked to oxidative damage to the body. Okay. So while exercise is important in losing weight for reasons that we're going to discuss shortly, the best way to lose weight is simply to cut back on total calories consumed. This advertisement shows a product that contains the stimulant ephedra. For example, that's a supplement that's meant to increase metabolism. The problem is that this supplement has been associated with stroke and seizure and even in some cases death, so it was ultimately taken off the market. A bit more about calories. Calories in food are determined by literally burning the food in something called a calorimeter. The problem with that is not all food is absorbed, so not all food calories are metabolic calories. Fiber in food, for example, is not absorbed. So this is a kind of exception to the calorie rule. Some food labels list fiber calories separately. For the most part, it's not an issue because most of the foods we don't contain a high amount of fibers. But those that do, you have to realize there can be a discrepancy between the fiber as calories as indicated by a calorimeter and the calories that count towards your metabolism or weight. Now, calories that a person needs to maintain a certain weight represent the sum of our basal metabolism rate and the activities. That's the calories out. Basal metabolism rate and activities. For example, a person who weighs, say, 150 pounds might have a caloric expenditure of roughly 2,000 calories per day. That would be 1,500 calories due to their basal metabolism rate and maybe another 500 calories for exercise. These numbers that I've quoted here are just kind of approximations. And just to add a little bit to the confusion for you, when I'm talking about calories, and in general when people are speaking of calories, for example, on food product labels, when they indicate a calorie, they really mean a kilocalorie. So whether I explicitly say kilocalorie, as is in the slide shown here, or just say calorie, I mean kilocalorie. Sorry, but that's kind of the conventional way that this is done. Okay, enough about calories already. Let's look at what happens when an overweight person loses weight. This very interesting little graph that shows you something you may not be aware of. Looking at the diet only part of this slide here, you see that not only is fat lost, but lean muscle is lost when a person loses weight. So here we see that body fat is lost, and check this out, lean muscle, or lean body mass, which is the same as muscle, is lost when the person is losing weight. They kind of become, forgive me for saying it this way, but a smaller fat person. On the other hand, if someone is doing, including diet with their exercise, interesting phenomenon occurs. They lose a lot of body fat and just a small amount of lean body mass or muscle. This is called the muscle sparing effect of exercise. And it is very important. So please keep this in mind if you or anyone you know is ever in a caloric restriction kind of paradigm, because if you don't exercise, a lot of the weight that you're going to lose is lean body mass, which is not a good thing. The other unsuspected consequence of weight loss is that our BMR actually decreases. The body wants to maintain homeostasis, so it in effect adapts to the caloric deficit. The left-hand panel shows reduction in weight as a function of time with someone who is in a continued state of caloric deficit. And, it makes sense. Now, on the right-hand panel, it's interesting because it shows that total energy expenditure without exercise, so this is more or less like basal metabolism rate, actually goes down as the person loses weight. And this reduction is persistent. It actually means that a person who was once overweight has to eat less to maintain a healthy weight than if he or she was never overweight in the first place. And this is a part of the reason only about 10% of people who lose weight manage to keep it off. So, what's the best overall diet or eating plan for optimal health? Well, frankly, it's a matter of opinion. And while there are many named diets out there, perhaps it's best to concentrate on what foods are healthy and what foods are not healthy. The U.S. 2015 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee recommends that a healthy diet pattern is high in vegetables, fruits, whole grains, lower non-fat dairy, seafood, legumes, and nuts, and moderate in alcohol. So those are the things that we should be eating in high amounts, or should be a major part of our diet. Then on the low end should be red and processed meats, sugar, and refined grains. These are things that we should be careful to avoid or have in low amounts. Here are a couple publications which pretty much just bring home the point I just made. So let's take a look at one such pattern of eating collectively lumped under the rather vague term the Mediterranean diet. And it pretty much goes along the lines of the dietary guidelines. Committee recommendation, you see here, we have our whole grains constituting the largest part of the pyramid, fruits and vegetables. So these are all plant-based foods. And then we have unsaturated oils such as olive oil, and then fish would be another staple. And as we move up the pyramid, we get less and less to where sweets and meats are something that should just be had on occasion. And interestingly enough, an occasional alcoholic beverage is considered appropriate as well. Now, if you'd bear with me, I'd like to just take a look at some biblical passages that touch on food. So we see before the flood, God said to Adam, I give you every seed-bearing plant to eat. And then after the flood, interestingly enough, it changes to everything that lives and moves will I give you for food, just as I gave you the green plants previously. And I can't help but wonder, is this some kind of a concession to what really is the best, which is to stick with the seed-bearing plants? Then also we see that in Daniel, Daniel says, please test your servants for 5 days, giving us, for 10 days, giving us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. And we all know how that works out. And so you have to ask yourself, well, obviously the Bible is suggesting that perhaps this is the best way to go and turn the optimal diet. And then we also have this interesting verse, which says, bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. That's from the prodigal son passage. And this we see several times in the Bible where an animal is killed and eaten really as more of a feast than as a routine kind of practice. So when is it appropriate to eat meat? Well, on occasion, and I kind of celebrate kind of a thing, not all the time. And then lastly, this is what interesting to me is the biblical perspective on bread and fish. I mean, we know the Bible talks about bread, being the staff of life, and man does not live by bread alone. So many good things the Bible has to say about bread, and virtually all of Jesus' disciples were fishermen, and so we know that the biblical perspective on grain and fish is rather positive. So it's just fascinating to me that so many of these passages from the Bible really portend what was subsequently found out by rigorous clinical studies. Could have gotten it right from the text of the Bible. So I just wanted to show a couple slides that illustrate, while we often think about the effect of diet on cardiovascular disease. It also impacts other aspects of health, such as lung cancer. And you can see here that this paper talks about an inverse relationship between lung cancer and fatty foods, and how there's an increased frequency of fish decreases risk. Carrots are a good thing. Greens are a good thing. Increased risk with red meat. And you could look at this on your own. You see they're essentially the same thing in terms of colon cancer. Okay, changing gears a bit. The question often comes up, can we get the nutrients we need from supplements rather than eating all those nasty vegetables like broccoli? I wish that was the case. After all, supplements are natural and they can't hurt, right? Well, as you can see from this article in Consumer's Report, 10 surprising dangers of vitamins and supplement. And actually, I've got to tell you that every day, something or another by way of supplements is being shown to be potentially harmful. And really, it was in 1994 that the passage of this Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act really brought all of these vitamins and supplements as very popular products, because they, at that point, were no longer under the purview of the FDA and did not have the level of regulation that actual drugs do. So it's kind of a wild west in terms of dietary supplements. This figure shows the results of a rather interesting study. It was long ago observed that people who ate carrots had a lower incidence of cancer. So, a trial was conducted looking at the incidence of cancer in smokers who were randomized to either a beta-carotene supplement group or a no supplement group. The unexpected result was that the cancer incidence was actually higher in the supplement group. So as you can see here, and this was statistically significant, the group that had the vitamins actually had a higher chance of coming down with cancer, and this was quite a shock. Similar findings have been observed for other supplement disease pairs. So to me, the bottom line is you just got to eat those vegetables. There's something in there that's missing in terms of our supplements, or the presence of the whole food is necessary for the active ingredients to work. There's just no way of getting around having the whole intact. Lastly, let's take a look at the curious phenomenon known as hormesis. Hormesis is when a beneficial effect, such as growth or longevity, results from exposure to a low dose of a physiological or a biochemical stressor. Now, the definition I just gave you is not rock solid, and you don't. I just want you to kind of understand it conceptually. And the most notable example that I've come across of this phenomenon is radiation. And you can see here that tumor incidence actually appears to drop with some low level of radiation and then increase again. And you would think that no radiation would be the ideal situation. Now, don't get the impression that this sort of thing happens with all stressors or toxins. As far as I know, something like smoking, every single cigarette does something bad to you. Nevertheless, it is fairly common, as we saw in our last lesson in the case of eustress. You remember eustress? Some stress is actually good for a person. And the relevant example of hormesis here is in fact the only proven way that is known increased lifespan and healthy lifespan as that, which is the little stress of caloric restriction. I shouldn't say little because you really have to undergo maybe 25% reduction in caloric intake in order to observe a prolongation of life. And studies in animals have demonstrated this over and over, from microscopic form up through monkeys, no question. And let's look at this. Let's look at what the slide has to say here. It talks about restriction, in this case in rodents, postponing age-related decline, slowing age-related increases in protein cross-linking and other biochemical measures, and delaying late onset diseases like cancer, cataracts, other things of that nature. So this is a very, very clear phenomenon, at least in animals, and studies in humans are going on. You know, obviously there's an ethical issue, but people volunteer. There's a caloric restriction society where the folks really undergo these drastic reductions in calories, and they seem to be doing very well. So the data does seem to be holding up for humans as well. And I personally, I think there's really no question about it that that level of caloric restriction seems to have health benefits. Well, that may be nice, but that level of caloric restriction is really very challenging to do. For one thing, you're always hungry, constantly hungry, and you give up a lot of muscle mass. You know, you look like emaciated in order to have that level of caloric restriction that you'll increase your lifespan. An alternate approach that's very interesting has been called intermittent fasting, where you go back and forth, you alternate periods of food restriction, drastic food restriction, basically fasting maybe for a day, with another day or two of eating at will. And this seems to work just as well, but as it shows here, you retain lean mass, and as far as I know, other than when the person is during the fasting period, you know, not hungry. So there's not that continuous hunger. Well, that was quite a trip down diet lane. Hope you enjoyed it and took something away that you didn't know before. Next week we're going to be talking about 3 specific components, chemical components really, of our diet: sugar, fats, and salt. In the meantime, I'd like to leave you with this simple message, which is really espoused by the well-respected author and foodie Mike Pollan. That is, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. If you stick with that, you won't go wrong. And when I say food, what's meant by food here is whole, unprocessed food. Think of it this way: the kind of thing your grandmother would have been eating when she was your age. Okay? All right, my friends. God bless and be well, and we'll see you at our Class 5 session.